to about 35 people. But it was always done cheap and fast and slightly out of control, but it got done and it got released. On Heroes Over Europe, the team's plan was to do everything right. So there was going to be a new engine that gave them all of the support they needed, all these next-gen features. There's going to be a new tool set as well that was going to be much better than the old tool set. The artists would love working in it and it would fix all the problems that they had. So, you know, in hindsight, now we can look back 3.5, 4 years later and say, you know, this is not realistic. The expectations, the budget and the timeline that was set up right at the start of the project. And having spoken to a few of the principals lately about why this was done, why the budget and the timeline and the scope were agreed, was basically to get the project started. There was, you know, although it's not spoken about, you have to imagine that everyone knew that this wasn't actually going to be possible, and that we, the developers, were going to be going back to the publisher saying, look, we need more money, we need more time. You know, we can't build the game that was promised or that you've demanded. For the amount of money that you've demanded, we build it for. So after 10 months, which is a couple of months after the end of pre-production, there was, I've got a video here of a first kind of playable version, so Martin's going to throw this up for us, or we will. This is the game after 10 months. And I'm afraid there's no sound here, so you'll just have to get the gist of it. Basically, this is a couple of months before the end of, well, actually this is the end of pre-production, but I don't think anything changed in the 2 months after that. So, as you can see, you know, there's not a lot going on. The team actually started with a full game. Thanks, Mark. The team started with a full game. They had Heroes of the Pacific, but because, as I mentioned, of this attitude, you know, this blue sky attitude, they threw away the entire game and started again. So they didn't keep the AI, they didn't keep the physics, they didn't keep the player controls, they didn't keep the cameras, they didn't keep the mission scripting. All of that threw away. This, the terrain you see on the ground, that's not created in the terrain tool. That's big Maya mesh, which is just being thrown onto the screen and kind of rendered. So what you see here is, even after 10 months, is that the game is at an incredibly rudimentary and basic stage of development. At the end of pre-production, basically that finished in August. The planned release date was pushed from Q1 2008 to Q3 2008. They recognised that they were going to need more time even at this early stage. So development time here switched from being 24 months to being 30 months. There was no change to the budget in this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump ahead, right? That was 10 months of development. We're going to look at another video now, which is 20 months of development. So if we'll just throw this one, Martin. And I'll mention that Heroes of the Pacific was 21 months in development entirely. So this is Heroes Over Europe at 20 months. Basically what you can see is the camera is slightly improved, the player control is slightly improved. We have AI in here now. There's dudes you can shoot and they have maneuvers and, you know, they can fly around. The actual gauges aren't working, the HUD isn't working here. The other thing that is worth noting is down on the ground is what's called the first version of Cityscape. Now, one of the big things about Heroes of Europe, which was different from Heroes of the Pacific, was that it was going to have these big cities. In this case, this is London. And this technology here, as I say, is called Cityscape. And what it was based on was marking out road maps of London with information, and then it would procedurally populate those road networks with buildings like you saw there. The procedural side of this, like many of the technologies in Heroes Over Europe, was thrown away later. The artists weren't happy with the representation. As you can see in the screenshot here, what you ended up with was these large blocks with hollow kind of insides in them. The artists weren't happy with that, and eventually we reverted to almost hand placing all of the buildings around the road networks that we had. We're going to look at the terrain tool later, how that works, so I'll take you through that in a little bit. So, slightly after this, around 21 months into the development, the engine and tools were complete, obviously. You can see what we had there running. This isn't a secret, it was, but it isn't well known. Red Mile at the time were going to be listed on one of the stock exchanges, New York, I think, and they wanted to add value to their company. And in adding value to their company, they saw that transmission was a valuable kind of asset. So they were in negotiations to purchase transmission games, and we would become Red Mile Australia. RMA. Now, Heroes at this stage was being rescoped and rebudgeted continually, and one of the things that changed during the negotiations for Red Mile to buy Transmission Games, and this was the thing that probably had the largest detrimental impact to Transmission Games rather than the actual project, was that basically the budget was renegotiated and all future budget changes to the game, because we were going to be one company, there was no profit margin, there was no contingency. We were going to be doing the game as a subsidiary of Red Mile Entertainment. And basically they said to us, well, you know, because you're a subsidiary, we don't need a profit margin here in all your budgets. You're just going to do it, and whatever it costs, it costs. They also wanted to keep a contingency back in the main Red Mile. Obviously, for their filing and their stock market listing, they wanted to keep as much cash as possible in their coffers rather than ours. And they said, look, don't worry about the contingency. If you run into problems, if anything goes wrong, just tell us, and we'll give you some more money for the project. So this, all sounds great, except that they didn't purchase Transmission Games. Transmission Games stayed independent, but our budgets from that point on stayed no profit margin, no contingency. So every time we had an overage from that point on, the company had to pay for it from somewhere, from some other project. So all of our profits, all of the money generated from other projects, from this point onwards, started to get poured into Heroes over Europe to fund this development. Everything that went late or went over budget cost other projects, and it cost the company. So, that was cheery, but carry on here. This is one of the first scope reductions of Heroes. Like obviously we pushed the actual date out before, but this is the first scope reduction that we had on the project. This happened late 2007. As I mentioned, the game was meant to have 26 missions in it. And recognising that the terrain tool wasn't finished, the team said, well, we can't achieve all 26 missions. We can't build enough terrains in the time that we have for our Q3 2008 release. So what we need to do is we need to cut some missions out of the game. And at this stage, the game was split up into 5 squadrons. Squadron 3 had 10 missions in it. So it had, almost 40% of the entire missions in the game. The other squadrons had, 4 or 5 missions each. So they were small. So what they did is remove Squadron 3 from the game entirely. This was the North Africa, Italy squadron. And that basically, in one easy cut out 10 missions. So the game went from having 26 missions to having 16 missions. But it also removed some other things. We removed the multiplayer missions from the game, so suddenly there was no more multiplayer missions. We changed co-op mode from being co-op play to being Conquest mode and Conquest Wars. And we removed split screen from the game. The only thing that was added here was the PC SKU was added back in. And the PC SKU, at the time they thought it might be worth about $1 million of extra revenue. So that would offset some of the increased cost of the project and the the reduction in scope that we had. So that's the first scope reduction. We'll see through it. Now, around the end of 2007, it was recognised by Red Mile that they needed to actually sign a co-publisher for the game. So what normally happens with Red Mile is that they'll fund the development as long as they can, and then when the game is almost ready to ship, they'll go out and find co-publishers for it, publishers who have marketing departments, who have distribution, who have all of the infrastructure that Red Mile didn't have. It's like a small boutique publisher. To get that deal done, we changed focus from Heroes onto the whole game to just getting this one demo level done to a certain level of quality. And as you can see here, to date we've spent 90% of that original, how many million? Down the back? 5 million. And as I said, we renegotiated new budgets with Red Mile at this point that added 60% on top of that original, which gives us how many? 8. Thank you. 8 million. But the extra 3 million here, you get an extra prize later. The extra money here had no profit margin and no contingency. So once again, if we went over on the start,